So Brandon Staley, his time in Los Angeles, is it over?
It will be at some point soon. It might not be tomorrow. It might not be next week, but yeah, this is a wrap on Brandon Staley with the Chargers. As soon as they are no longer in their minds have a chance of making the playoffs, that's when Brandon Staley's going to be kicked to the curb. And honestly, the odds are really small for them right now. I think they have like a 12% chance to make the playoffs as things stand today. They're sitting at 4-6. 9-8 would get you in a tiebreaker scenario for the last playoff spot. 10 wins would probably guarantee you a playoff spot. That would require them to go 6-1 the rest of the season. I'm pretty sure they've got a Kansas City game still left on that schedule. So that's not something that's going to work in your favor for getting a deep playoff run in there. They've dropped too many of these one-score games now, and I do not think they'll be able to recover. And Staley is the easy fall guy to turn to. Although there are flaws in roster construction, particularly the worst pass defense in the NFL right now, of which the Chargers currently boast. Which, do you know how bad your pass defense has to be worse than the goddamn Arizona Cardinals, who don't have a competent cornerback on their entire team? The Chargers have some failures in roster construction, but for the most part, Brandon Staley is also not coaching very well. Weird clock management decisions in the conservative direction. This one looks like it's going to be just about a wrap for Brandon Staley, assuming the Chargers are going to miss the playoffs, which in all likelihood they probably will.
I think most people could have gave you a "I told you so" when it comes to Brandon Staley coming off of last season in particular, because I put it out there. I thought that, okay, if there was ever a time to move off Brandon Staley after that embarrassing playoff loss, it was last year. It was this offseason. You had Sean Payton just sitting there, could have been picked up by anyone, and they said, nah, we'll keep him. We'll retain him one more year. And Sean Payton, you look at what's going on in the Broncos. We talked about that it seems like they've kind of shifted things along in a positive direction there. That could have been happening in Los Angeles. You could have paired a Hall of Fame offensive mind with a Hall of Fame quarterback, or at least a Hall of Fame talent at quarterback potentially. And they just decided, no, we'll just keep the status quo. Now that guy's just not there on this year's like head coaching market. Like, look ahead and project, we're going to be the top candidates this offseason. I've thrown out the name Bobby Slowik a couple times, but again, the problem with the Chargers, if they go in that direction, another first-time head coach. The Chargers, I think they're on a streak of 4 or 5 straight first-time head coach hirings, right? They need to break that
Yeah,
streak. I
North
think that
Turner was the last one.
exactly. They need to break that streak. They need to find someone that has at least some coaching credibility. I think on this next coaching hire, people are going to throw out the names like Jim Harbaugh. Potentially, we'll see what happens there with Michigan and his pursuit and NFL teams pursuing him. That one's going to cost some money. Another move that's going to cost some money. This has been thrown around, trading for Bill Belichick. That has been a move that's been floated around by a lot of people, not just me, but it's ambitious. But when you talk about their failures on the defensive end of the ball, like 32nd on pass defense, 32nd on run defense, 32nd on run defense, 32nd on run defense. Maybe you need a defensive mind, a defensive genius to pair along with your potential all-pro quarterback. You need someone with some experience in that room. I mean, Kellen Moore is going to be a name too. Do you just elevate Kellen Moore? But again, first-time head coach. I don't know if that's the direction you go. So like, it's just trying to find who's the right candidate to get in there. I'm not sure, but those are really just some of the names that are going to get thrown out there.
So you're saying you're looking for a coach that will improve the defense, a coach with a lot of head coaching experience, and someone who will bring a stability to an unstable organization. Is that what I'm hearing right now?
Are you going to throw out like Rex Ryan or something?
No, I wasn't going to be that stupid. But I am curious, what's Marvin Lewis up to these days? Haven't heard from him in a while. What's Marvin Lewis doing?
I feel like Marvin Lewis sounds like a Chargers head coach, if for nothing else, because I associate Marvin Lewis with playoff failures, which I associate with the Chargers as well.
I'm not going to say Lincoln Riley. I know he's already living down the street, but I'm not going to say Lincoln Riley. But if you are going to go the college route, check out Kalen DeBoer over there, or Kalen DeBoer over there in Washington. That guy has some coaching acumen. And if you're looking for a college coach that might translate well over to the pros, go give Kalen DeBoer a call up there in Washington. The Chargers are very often a damned if you do, damned if you don't franchise. Like whatever direction you end up going, you're usually going to have something go wrong. Anthony Lynn wasn't even that bad of a head coach. Like the last year it fell apart because Phillip Rivers was washed. Okay, I can get behind that. Like, yes, they didn't want Anthony Lynn being the guy who was working with Justin Herbert. And I can get behind that. But
Well, Anthony Lynn also sabotaged himself too with his decision to start Tyrod Taylor out the gate rather than putting in Herbert right away, which when we saw Herbert get in there, they could have probably picked up a couple more wins in that season and made a playoff run had they potentially just shifted to the rookie early on. And that was completely on Anthony Lynn and his decision making.
yeah, and Anthony Lynn was not one of these what you might call offensive innovators in the sport. Case in point, I think he's with the Niners as a position group coach now or something like that. So Anthony Lynn is not one of those offensive innovators, but that was why they brought in Brandon Staley, right? Was we can get someone who's worked with Sean McVay, an offensive innovator, and change things up for us, and that just wasn't the case before. Hasn't been the case with bringing in Kellen Moore. It's just not working the way the Chargers had hoped it would, despite the fact Justin Herbert has shown all the signs of being a tier 2 NFL quarterback. And a lot of people were crushing Justin Herbert after that loss, which, yeah, sure, maybe looking at you, Juju. A lot of people were crushing that Justin Herbert performance because, okay, maybe the throw to Quentin Johnson could have been 4 inches shorter on the pass, and maybe he hauls it in and they kick the game-winning field goal. Yeah, and then Keenan Allen had the game-winning touchdown, hit him in the sternum and drop because the sun at Lambeau or something, and Austin Eckler fumbling at the goal line and giving the ball back to the Packers. Like, yeah, Justin Herbert has shown the signs of being a tier 2 quarterback. He is not perfect. He is also a quarterback that I would want on my team for the next 15 years. And so they're kind of in this precarious position where that job should be attractive to a top-end NFL head coach, and yet it is not. Why? Because they are the goddamn Chargers. That's why. They're not going to spend money to get into this big money football game. They're not going to have stability within the organization because that ownership group and that front office has not, I mean, despite the fact they've kept this front office employed for a long time, they have not exhibited the strength and stability one might expect from a top of the line NFL front office. And the revolving door of coaches who, by the way, are given ample time to succeed. Like Anthony Lynn might have stayed around a year too long. Brandon Staley might have stayed around a year too long. I know for damn sure Mike McCoy stayed around a year too long when he was the head coach of the Chargers. So like they give these coaches ample opportunities to try and prove themselves. And very few of them end up working out the way that every person who takes the Chargers job ends up getting fired. That seems to be the theme of them going through hiring head coaches. So whether they want to go the defensive coach that has experience, or if they want to try a first-time offensive coordinator like Bobby Slowik or Ben Johnson over there with the Detroit Lions, because I think he's going to get one of these head coaching jobs this cycle. Like maybe they go that direction. Maybe they go the college route. Everyone who ends up taking the Chargers job ultimately gets fired. This is not a job that is like, A, a launch pad to something else, or B, something that, you know, after you get fired by the Chargers, you actually have a resurrection of your career. It's just not how this thing goes. And I think I know that's a symptom of the ownership and you know, the people in charge of that organization. But I think in this specific case, it's a symptom of expectation not meeting reality and the ownership group not wanting to punt on mistakes.
Now, you know, I'm a Harbaugh homer, but I would say I think if he did go there, if the Chargers were willing to dole out the money, I think that Harbaugh would find success there because he was able to have success with the 49ers with Alex Smith at quarterback. He resurrected Alex Smith's career there in that 2011 season. I look at a guy like Herbert, who just honestly wants some solid head coaching. I think Herbert, he's a smart guy. I'm sure he knows what's going on in the room, and I think he looks at a guy like Brandon Staley and kind of also knows that his career has been a little bit hindered by the lack of a solid head coach as well. I think if you got a guy like Jim Harbaugh who knows how to work with quarterbacks in the room, I think that would be a world of change for that organization. Heck, even again, I know it's a long shot, but if they were able to pull off a trade to get Bill Belichick or manage to get him out there to LA, get him out of the cold and dreariness of Boston, like that's a guy that Justin Herbert would respect. I'm sure, honestly, Justin Herbert would just respect anyone who could talk offense. You mentioned Ben Johnson. We talked about Kellen Moore. Kellen Moore, a former quarterback himself. I'm sure that they have been able to relate and talk about offense themselves on the sidelines as well. Even that move would feel a bit weird. Again, I just kind of hate the first time head coaching hirings for the Chargers as is. I feel like they just need to pivot in a different direction. Again, they got to spend the money because being second fiddle in LA is not a good look. Being the second franchise in LA is never a good look because you look at the Clippers, how that's developed into little brother syndrome for them over the course of their franchise. Now it seems like at least they've headed in a positive trend over the last 10 years, ever since Ballmer took over there. The Chargers need something similar to happen. I think ultimately what most Chargers fans would ask for is the Spanos family just to go about their business and do something else, just not football related.
Well, you already took our team out of San Diego, buddy. You already took our team away from us. The damage is already done. I don't know what good it's going to be now. I kind of just want him to stay there just to torment that goddamn franchise for however long they're going to be there. Cause you've already ruined the San Diego Chargers. I mean, why not just keep running that shit into the ground? I don't get what the game plan is there. And look, the thing I always say with head coaching hot cycles, which again, Brandon Staley hasn't technically been fired yet. We just kind of assume that that's where we're headed at this point. But get a diverse pool of candidates, sit them down, do your job on the interview, and then try and dissect who you think has the best vision for where the franchise is going from this point forward. You don't have to force a head coaching hire from this point forward. And if they do sit down and decide we're just going to go get Jim Harbaugh, well, that's perfect. Because like I just said a second ago, everyone who's ever taken the Chargers job has taken the job to get fired. And they usually don't have career improvements after leaving the Chargers. So Jim Harbaugh, it would be a short time, but not a long time. And that seems to be the name of the game for Jim Harbaugh, because as soon as discomfort hits, as soon as he kind of bucks up against ownership, he is on his way out.
Well, that's a question I got to ask you, and I was thinking about it in my head just now about Harbaugh. Tom Telesco, how much rope does he have left here? Because obviously he's been through multiple head coaches now as the GM there as Chargers. And I still think the Chargers ownership likes the job he does. I don't think most fans complain about the roster he builds, especially from the offensive side of the ball. He's definitely found some gems, but usually you don't see a GM last this many head coaches either.
I genuinely have no idea where things stand with Tom Telesco and the Chargers, because this is now going to be his fourth head coach. He was with McCoy. He was with Lynn. He's with Staley. This is going to be his fourth head coach. He's been in that job for a decade, which there's the old Al Davis quote that like anyone who's worked a job for a decade, it's become monotonous and you should probably go do something else. Like, even if it's a different arrangement for him, like being in the same job for a decade can sometimes get a little bit stale. So I don't know. This is what the Vikings did a couple years ago when they fired the brother of the broadcaster, whose name that I'm forgetting right now, their old general manager. He was just there for 9 years, wasn't doing a bad job, wasn't doing a great job, and they just decided to go in another direction and bring in the guy from the Browns and then hire Kevin O'Connell. They just needed new voices in that front office and in that coaching staff. So I don't know where Telesco stands at this point. Seems to be well liked by ownership, seems to put together roster and find, like you said, find diamonds in the rough. And he hit on the quarterback, which is the biggest thing, right? Took one shot at the quarterback, hit, and they had a 15-year pivot off 15 years of Hall of Fame Phillip Rivers. So yeah, I don't really know where things stand with him at this point. I presume he's going to be protected.
Yeah, it just makes me wonder because, like, when I think about Harbaugh and I think about his relationship with Trent Baalke in the past and how that relationship disintegrated because Harbaugh didn't want Baalke, he wanted his own guy. I feel as though if Jim Harbaugh was to come back to the NFL, he would want his guy. I feel if Bill Belichick was to end up in Los Angeles, he would want a guy that he could trust. Is that Tom Telesco? Who knows? Tom Telesco has no ties that I'm aware of to the Patriots or that Patriots tree. I'm sure that would cause some friction there potentially. Although I think the biggest thing, if Bill does get a change of scenery, we've learned he needs someone who can pick the groceries for him. So that's probably the one thing that might impact them hiring a more experienced or veteran head coach, because typically those guys usually come with their own GMs or at least have a say in who their GM is. But all right, guys, well, let us know below in the comments section. What do you think of Brandon Staley's future with Los Angeles? Do you think it's finally hit that point of no return? Leave a like on the video, subscribe to the channel, follow us on all our social medias from Juju and Kyle. Stay safe, happy, and healthy. We'll see you next time.